So, apparently, we're building a militia. While we were all distracted by tariffs, Ottawa was quietly drafting a citizens' army to, and I'm not joking here, fend off the Americans. If you thought the trade war was messy, well, wait until you see the war plan.
Publicly, Canada keeps insisting everything's fine. The relationship with the U.S. is strong, stable, nothing to worry about here.
But privately, the military is mapping out how to recruit and equip 300,000 Canadians for a citizens' reserve, a force large enough to respond to high-intensity conflict. You don't plan something like that unless Ottawa is deeply worried about where our southern neighbor is actually headed.
Internal documents obtained by CBC show the Department of National Defense, the DND, is scrambling to figure out how to clothe, equip, and train a force Canada hasn't attempted to build in generations.
Yeah, this is not a modest expansion. This is a surge big enough to add 100,000 reservists and as many as 300,000 civilian volunteers. And the people inside the system admit that they don't yet know how they're going to actually pull this off.
The Internal Defense Department documents CBC got their hands on paint a pretty blunt picture. Ottawa isn't talking about a little recruitment push here. They're sketching out how you build something the size of an entire city's worth of part-time soldiers. Because you don't plan for 300,000 civilian reservists unless someone, somewhere, thinks the world could tilt fast.
And you can feel the tension in the way the military describes its own situation. Everything, it's already at capacity. Supply chains, inventory, training, all of those are maxed out. We can barely re-equip the regular force as it is. So when the briefing notes float the idea of handing out retired uniforms because the new ones could take 2 years to arrive, well, that's not a country casually refreshing its wardrobe. That's a country trying to buy time.
Canada needs to figure out how to grow a force quickly after decades of assuming peace was the default. Well, that's what happens when you're the steady neighbor and the guy next door suddenly stops taking his meds. Canada isn't planning for a what-if situation. It's responding to a world that doesn't feel as calm or stable as it used to be.
And the chief of the defense staff summed it up more honestly than really anyone probably intended. They're planning to plan. Now, that's not very reassuring. That's a senior military leader telling the country, we see the storm forming, and we're scrambling to build the roof before it actually hits. And honestly, you can feel the urgency between the lines. The sense that the world is shifting faster than Canada's old assumptions can keep up with.
They've even created a brand new mobilization office, the first of its kind. It's basically tasked with asking the question no one wants to say out loud. How do we scale up if we suddenly have to? It's a kind of position you create when you don't like the answers you're getting from the old system.
So why is Canada suddenly talking about a citizens' army at all? Well, it's not because anyone in Ottawa woke up nostalgic for wartime posters, I can tell you that. It's because Trump's new national security strategy landed like a brick on the doorstep, and the people who actually understand national security took one look and said, "Oof, this is bad."
The document is basically a mission statement for American dominance, not partnership, dominance. Canada gets one passing mention lumped in with a bunch of other allies as a trade imbalance, and the rest of it is about reshaping the Western Hemisphere to suit American interests, even if it means pressuring or destabilizing neighbors who don't fall in line.
And here's the part that Canadians really need to hear. Former diplomats and intelligence officials are openly warning that the language in Trump's strategy looks like a blueprint for meddling in our politics. Not covertly, blatantly. It says the U.S. will reward political movements that align with their agenda. And if you've been watching the rise of Maple MAGA here, that line should ring a little louder than it did the first time.
And this isn't coming out of nowhere either. Trump has already talked about annexing Canada more times than anyone should be comfortable with. He admitted that if we didn't fall in line, he'd use economic pressure. He slapped tariffs on everything from aluminum to forestry, and he's threatened to carve up the country sector by sector until someone cracks.
So when Canada looks at that doctrine and sees a neighbor who treats us as something to use rather than something to work with, it suddenly becomes really clear why the D&D is planning for scenarios we never imagined discussing in peacetime.
This isn't about picking a fight with the United States. That ship sailed the minute Trump was reelected. It's about accepting the fact that the U.S. might pick a fight with us, economically, politically, or in the worst case scenario, militarily. And Canada's trying to get way ahead of that curve for once.
And right on cue, we get U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra stepping forward with the classic political lullaby. Don't worry, everything's fine. He insists Americans aren't meddling in our politics, that the relationship is rock solid, and that Canadians should basically stop overreacting.
But Hoekstra's public tone doesn't match the facts. This is the same ambassador who accused Canada of meddling in U.S. politics over a simple MLB playoff commercial about tariffs, a commercial that pointed out the truth and economic reality of Trump's policies. He accused Canada of interference for defending its own industries. Classic Trump move. Redirect attention by accusing others of the very thing your own government is preparing to do.
And that's the pattern with this chump Hoekstra. Whenever Canada pushes back, even mildly, he treats it as inappropriate. But when his own government codifies a doctrine that pressures allies, punishes non-compliant governments, and openly talks about rewarding friendly political movements, suddenly we're told not to worry?
This behavior is not new. It shows up again and again, even in his comments this week. When asked whether Canada's review of the F-35 purchase was a problem for Washington, Hoekstra said, Canada is free to do what it wants, but then immediately called the review irritating. That tells you everything. He frames every Canadian decision-making as an inconvenience while expecting us to treat American policy as unquestionable.
And it fits the same pattern that we've seen all year from this guy. When Canada defends its own interest, Hoekstra calls it interference. When the U.S. formalizes a strategy that pressures allies politically and economically, well, we're told not to worry. He scolds Canada for asking basic questions about a $28 billion fighter program, but has nothing to say about a national security strategy that directly reshapes how the U.S. deals with its neighbors.
And that's why his reassurance now falls flat. You can't tell Canadians that everything is fine while repeatedly dismissing our concerns, downplaying new American doctrines, and treating Canadian decision-making, whether it's satellites, reserves, or fighter jets, as an annoyance. Those are the actions of a government preparing to pressure a neighbor, not partner with one.
And you definitely can't tell Canadians not to worry while our own military leadership is being instructed to explore what a 300,000-person civilian reserve would look like. Those two realities don't line up unless someone in Ottawa sees risks Hoekstra doesn't want to acknowledge publicly.
Meanwhile, the national security strategy he's defending literally spells out that the U.S. intends to support political movements in this hemisphere that serve American interests. Not Canadian interests, American. And somehow we're meant to believe Canada will be the exception, the one country they'll leave untouched out of the goodness of their heart.
It really is an odd type of reassurance, especially when Hoekstra insults and scolds us every chance that he gets. It's hard to miss that double standard.
And while all of this is happening, Ottawa quietly makes another move that tells you where their head is at: the Arctic.
The government just announced a strategic partnership with Telesat and MDA Space to build out military satellite communications for the North. Now, on the surface, it sounds like technical jargon. Enhanced Satellite Communications Project, Polar, Wideband and Narrowband Connectivity, MilSatCom Architecture. But in plain language, Canada is basically trying to finally fix the fact that our own military can't reliably talk to itself across huge chunks of our Arctic.
So this isn't about whether Zoom calls in Nunavut get better. It's about secure communications for NORAD, surveillance, search and rescue, and sovereignty patrols over the territory that countries would be quite happy to see us neglect. We dug into this in our Putin and Modi video that you can find out in the links below or right here if you're on your phone or computer. So check that out after this video. We'll also put a link at the end of this video as well, because this is something we really need to take seriously and get informed about.
The Arctic is becoming one of the most strategic pressure points in the world, and Canada sits right in the middle of it. When you invest in Arctic satellites at the same time you're exploring a citizens' reserve, it shows that Canada is responding to a very real shift in global pressure.
They even set up a new defense investment agency to speed this all up because the old procurement system moved at a glacial speed while the world, it was heating up fast.
And look at what they're promising in the fine print. This isn't just we'll rent capacity from who's ever available. It's about sovereign capabilities, Canadian controlled infrastructure, and making sure Canadian aircraft, ships, and ground forces can operate in the North without relying on someone else's network.
Put that beside Trump's doctrine for the Western Hemisphere, and it suddenly makes sense. If your neighbor is openly talking about dominating the region, you don't leave your communications in their hands. You build your own system in your own orbit over your own territory.
So, Arctic satellites, citizens' reserves, mobilization planning, none of these decisions were made in a vacuum. They're all part of the same quiet shift. Canada is starting to behave like a country that might have to stand up for itself, even if the United States is no longer on the same page.
Individually, each of these decisions could be explained away. A new office here, a satellite contract there, a briefing about reservists. But when you put them side by side, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Canada is quietly hardening the parts of its defense posture that have been ignored for decades.
And it's happening at the same moment the United States is rewriting its role in the world. It's positioning itself not as a partner to Canada, but as a power that expects compliance. Add to that the Arctic pressure we talked about in our Putin and Modi video, and suddenly this mobilization planning looks a lot less abstract.
The public message is still calm, the relationship is strong, nothing has changed, we're working closely with Washington. But the internal documents and the new investments tell another story entirely. A country doesn't prepare civilian reserves and Arctic communication networks because it feels safe. It prepares them because it doesn't.
This isn't about Canada looking for a fight. It's about a country recognizing that the assumptions it relied on for 70 years no longer feel guaranteed. If the neighbor you depend on starts shifting toward unpredictability, you don't wait to see how far it goes. You start building your own insurance policy.
And here's the part that Canadians struggle with the most. Why would the United States even go down this road? For 70 years, life in North America has been defined by stability, freedom, prosperity, cooperation. The idea that any of this could unravel because a handful of powerful men want to consolidate control, it just seems unthinkable.
But that's exactly what we're watching. This isn't about security. It's not about defending democracy. It's about influence, raw, unrestrained influence. Trump wants it, Putin wants it, and the people around them are willing to break systems that held the world together for generations in order to get it.
And yes, Trump has clearly absorbed decades of flattery, manipulation, and opportunism from Moscow. You know what I'm talking about, but the algorithm gods won't let me say it. But anyone paying close attention can see the pattern. But this goes way beyond Trump, because why are so many other wealthy men with every privilege imaginable suddenly intent on tearing down the structures that have kept the world cooperative for more than half a century? Why choose power over stability, and why choose chaos over prosperity for everyone?
And maybe this is where Canada's naivete finally cracks. For decades, we rolled our eyes when Americans called themselves the world police, but we still believed that they were fundamentally on the right side of history. We trusted the alliance, and we trusted the system.
And all it took was 2 elections that veered entirely off the rails for that assumption to collapse. Suddenly, the country we relied on is drifting toward authoritarian instincts, economic coercion, and geopolitical gambles that pull the whole continent into uncertainty.
So, to Americans watching this, please understand something. The rest of the world isn't judging you. We're worried for you. Because if this trajectory continues, the U.S. won't just damage its alliances, it will find itself isolated in a world that is increasingly willing to push back. Now, that's not a future that anyone should want.
And it doesn't have to go that way, but it will take a lot of courage. The kind that says enough is enough. The kind that chooses democracy over personality, stability over chaos, and cooperation over domination. because the stakes aren't just American anymore, they are global.
So, where does all of this leave us? With a Canada that's trying to adapt to a reality it never wanted, a world where our closest ally is suddenly unpredictable, inward looking, and willing to use economic pressure as a political weapon? We're not preparing for conflict because we expect one. We're preparing because the assumptions that kept this continent stable for 70 years can't be taken for granted anymore.
And that's why conversations like this are so important. Canadians are rightfully anxious, not because we dislike America, but because we've always believed in what America could be: a partner, a leader, a force for cooperation instead of domination. And we want that version of the United States back. We want the country we grew up with, not the one being warped by a man who sees allies as obstacles, democracy as negotiable, and being president as a way to make a quick buck. And to our American viewers, please share this video with people in your life who might not realize how deeply this shift is being felt beyond your borders. Canadians are angry, we're worried, and that's because the future of this continent depends on the United States choosing stability over chaos and partnership over pressure.
And if that message reaches even a few people, then we've done our job here today. Canada isn't giving up on its neighbor. We're hoping the best version of America shows up again before the world becomes far harder to repair.
So we're going to keep covering this and explaining it, and we're going to keep pushing back because we need to.
So that will do it for today. I hope you enjoyed this. Remember, if you're Canadian, stay informed and stay engaged. And if you want to go deeper on these topics, check out our Substack, Unfiltered North, because it's where we break down these issues with more detail, more context, and none of the algorithm pressure. The link's in the description below.
We also have a Facebook group where Canadians and Americans and the rest of the world are having thoughtful, respectful conversations about what this moment means for both countries. If you're looking for community or just trying to make sense of it all, you can join the conversation over there.
And if you want to support the channel directly, consider joining the A-Team. This work takes time, research, and a little courage some days, and your support lets us keep doing it independently without sponsors or scripts from anyone but us.
So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.